Welcome to the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. This is your host, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, helping business owners create financial freedom faster by mastering the language of money. Want to see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom? Complete our 40-point financial performance scorecard at wealthhealthcheck.com.au. That's wealthhealthcheck.com.au. The average score for most business owners is 18 out of 40. So complete the scorecard now and see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom.
G'day guys, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor here, and we are here for another episode of Financial Freedom Secrets. And I've got a good friend of mine, David Guest from Outcomes. David, as you could probably expect from the title of his business, is an absolute master of helping professional services businesses maximize the real tangible outcomes that they want to create for their business, and in turn leads them to be able to create more personal wealth. This is the reason why David and I get along so well. He's been a veteran at the industry and he works on the real tangible stuff, not these silly vanity metrics. It's the stuff that's going to put measurable dollars in your bank account. So it's a great opportunity for me to chat to him about his experience in the space, hopefully share some golden nuggets for you guys in the services space to grow and scale your services business, and hopefully get you on the right track for creating financial freedom faster. So David, thanks for joining us, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, going well. Thanks, Jackson. That was fast. You didn't stop talking for even a breath during that. I'm
not at all. Not at all. I've been working on my lung capacity, mate. So let's make sure we can keep up. So, my friend, for those of you who don't know you, tell us a little bit about who is David Guest.
Yeah, thanks. David Guest is me. Been doing this for about 20 years now, as in helping small business owners build their business, professional services, really sort of navigate the growth in business. Prior to that, I was in sales. I was in the IT industry for 10 years, so I had a sales background before that. And going back further, my parents were in business and I worked for them for 50 cents a day because it was cheaper than babysitting. Right? And I learned a lot about business from them because they were those hard workers that immigrants in the country didn't speak English, said, we're running this business so you can become a professional and get a real job. You can be a doctor or a lawyer. And it was like, okay. And I was not that good at school, so I didn't make it through academia. And so I said, hang on, how come some people in business make money and some people in business don't make money? And that became a quest for me. So learning the difference between those people who are self-employed and stuck and those people actually growing businesses has been my life's journey and what I help all of our clients with.
I love that, mate. I just put really beautifully and really simply, because there is a formula for success, right? And there are clues that are left for those who are really successful in business and go on to scale amazing businesses with immense amounts of profit and allow themselves to create the freedom and flexibility that they set out to create. And on the flip side, there's the battlers who create a job for themselves and go around in circles and very much miss the opportunities that many of these very affluent and successful business owners create. So if you had to summarize it, David, what are the common symptoms? What are the traps that separate one from the other?
Yeah. So Robert Kiyosaki wrote several books, and probably one of my favorites is the cash flow quadrant. Right, and in there he talks about this distinction of being an employee, being self-employed, being a business owner, and being an investor. And I think the dilemma is the difference between being self-employed and being a business owner, right? Because we all get running our own business. You know, that's when you work for yourself and not someone else. But the majority of people we meet in business are self-employed. And what that means is I get paid based on what I do, but the paycheck is inconsistent. That's self-employment, right? Which means if I don't get a job, I don't get paid. And being a business owner is one step above that, where it's not about having time for money, it's about actually making a profit. So I think the biggest trap is people think they're in business because they have an ABN, like Australian business number. But the reality is they're just a tax collector for the government who gets paid nothing for collecting the tax, right? And it's only when you realize that self-employment is still a job and that if I'm building a business, I need to move to the next level, that people start to realize there's a thing called working on my business, not just in it. And that whole psychology around saying I'm not trading time for money anymore, I'm building an entity that generates profit. And that's a big shift for a lot of people.
It makes a lot of sense, mate. And we see this a lot, right? We see a lot of people who are self-employed and they have this excuse where they're like, where's all your money? And they're like, I'm reinvesting it back into my business. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this, that was in inverted commas. And it was just a poor excuse for them just mismanaging their money. They had a cash flow business that was trading time for money. They weren't creating an asset. And therefore, there was nothing that could be sold So why the hell are they tipping in every last red bloody cent? And why aren't they building wealth or trying to create a proper business that actually gives them the time freedom and the flexibility that they want? Let's start with that, mate. Why is it that there is that common misconception between self-employment and business ownership? Is it a mindset thing? Is it an education thing? Is it something else altogether?
It's two things, right? The first thing is that people in business look at the cash coming into the bank account, the turnover.
Yes.
And they look at that and they go, that's the money that I make, right? And then they start to realize it's not turnover, it's not about turnover, it's about leftover. And really there's no leftover. So that's one of the errors, is they're measuring turnover. The second one is that they don't pay themselves. So what they do is they basically say, I'm a business owner, so I get what's left. And sometimes there's more month than money left. And so on those months, they call it sweat equity, or they say, I'm reinvesting in the business, and they give you all the stories under the sun for why they're not making a buck.
Yes.
Well, what they don't realize is when I'm employed, I get paid weekly wages, okay? And when I shift from being employed to being a business owner, I don't get paid the weekly wages anymore. And so I accept that as I'm a business person and I'm investing in my future. But what they don't realize is there's an opportunity cost.
Yes.
Okay. So that wage that they're not taking anymore, they should be still counting that as an expense to the business. But if you put that in your P&L, you'd be in the red from day one and you wouldn't be able to pay the bills. What they should be doing is putting an IOU in the bank account for every dollar that they should have been paid, and that business should be paying that back to them plus a margin on top of it. So where I'm going with this is that I think most people in business let themselves get away with not being paid properly.
Yes.
And because of that, they end up struggling because they underpay themselves. And I've got a funny rule of thumb on this. And the rule of thumb is that if you're going to run a business, your income, your target profit, not profit, your target leftover that you get should be 3 times what you're worth in the market on a wage.
Beautiful. I love that.
So if you get employed for 100K,
you got to make 300.
Going to make 300 net.
Beautiful.
Not revenue.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense, mate. And I like the analogy of the turnover and the leftover. I think that's much easier to understand because there's a lot of financial jargon that us financial blokes throw around, and that keeps it really simple. People can understand it. And I think the other part of this, mate, is that when you're not paying yourself and you're putting in all of this hard work, there's this kind of contradictory relationship between your effort in the business and your reward. And that gets old really quick. It's like, where's the positive reinforcement that gives you the acknowledgement for all of that hard work and effort that you're putting into the business? And it perpetuates, right? You don't value yourself, so you don't value your services, so you don't charge what you're worth, so you don't make the money that you need to make, which means you can't pay yourself. It's this like dichotomy, isn't it?
And here's the worst part. If I don't pay myself a wage, I won't employ other people because I make more if I do it myself.
Yes.
So in my mind, I'm going, well, if I have to pay someone to do my books, that's an extra $50 an hour that I have to find, where if I do it myself, I don't have to pay anyone. And that's where the false sense of security comes in, because you should be paying yourself. And you should be paying yourself at least what you're worth in a job. And when you start doing that, you start to realize the bookkeeper's cheaper than me.
Yes.
So there's silly little tricks that people they collude with themselves. I think the biggest problem with running a business is that you're the owner and the worker, and there's a conflict of interest, right? Because the owner is all about profitability and the worker is all about time for money. And if you're the same person, you end up with this collusion going on in your head.
Makes a lot of sense, mate. Fantastic. So let's talk about this transition. So let's assume we've overcome the self-employed and we've transitioned into being a business owner. Where are the next mistakes that business owners make that keep them from achieving financial freedom and earning the kind of money that they want to be earning?
Yeah, this is your shtick, right? Because here's what I've learned also, right? When people run a business, so if I go to an investment advisor, their advice is to pay yourself first, right? So when I get my wages, I should take 10% and put it in a charity, 10% put it in my non-reversible investment fund, and 10% into my slush fund. This is the old saying. So we learned Wealth Creation 101 is pay yourself first. And what that means is put money aside before you spend it. In business, most business owners pay themselves last. So what happens is they get leftover, and if there's no leftover, they don't get it. So the big problem is when I start making money in my business, if I don't take it out and put it into investment and I reinvest it in the business, there's no capital, there's no growth personally in terms of capital growth, yeah? And my business will suck all my funds. So we've got to learn to do some forced savings. I call it the profit account. And I say to people in business, take 1% of revenue and put it into an account that you cannot access. And they go, 1%. I go, what would happen if we did that? Would you miss it? And they go, probably not. I go, interesting. So then let's make it 2%, and you start growing this profit account. Now, there's a whole lot of different ways of doing this, but unless you force savings out of the business will consume all the money. So I think they need to start thinking in terms of, how am I taking money out in a reasonable way? I'm not starving the business, in a reasonable way that I can start accumulating wealth outside of the business. And unless you have that plan from day one, because if you're not making any money, 1% is zero. So it's not a lot.
Exactly.
But if you force savings as a percentage of revenue, you will continue to increase the amount of money you're taking out as the business grows.
Beautiful. And I think this flows in really well to the business strategy side of things, I suspect, is obviously we get addicted to maximizing profit as opposed to chasing vanity metrics. And then that allows us to actually make more informed and educated decisions in the business of, okay, cool, how do I increase my return on investment, my return on equity, and what are the kind of levers I need to be pulling in my business to grow and scale? And this is where I think it becomes very overwhelming, particularly for professional services businesses that get over 7 figures. Because let's face it, if you're good at as a professional services provider and you're self-employed, you can probably earn a few $100,000 a year as a high-level consultant. Then you transition your consultancy into a business, you get some other consultants under you, you build a business, and that gets you to 7 figures. Or you need to make sure you've got a really good value proposition and you've got good delivery, right? But then from 7 figures and onwards, I see so many professional services businesses lose all sense of direction and purpose, because I think that kind of coincides where their business doesn't need them as much anymore. And sometimes they're kind of like twiddling their thumbs going, I feel like I should be doing something and I feel guilty because I'm not.
Uh-huh.
How do we combat that, mate, with the scale plan from 7 figures and above?
Yeah. So when we work with the clients we coach, there's 3 phases of growth. The first one is get out of chaos, right? So most people running small business, self-employed, they're chaotic, right? They're busy, and when they get more work, they can't do any marketing because they're too busy doing the work. And when they run out of work, they're going to marketing. So they just run around like crazy. Then we talk about the growth engine, and in there's 2 elements. There's get the work in, and then there's deliver the work. And the business owner's job in that situation is to manage the growth, which means put more money into marketing until there's more work than we can handle, then grow the team to deliver. And we keep doing this. Now, that's management. What you've just described is when we move beyond management. So our teams are now self-managing. We can afford to put managers in to run marketing, sales, and operations. And the business owner now sits at the top of all this going, hey, I don't have anything to do. Now, the risk there is what I call self-sabotage. Yep.
Yes.
And typically the business owner who has nothing to do will go and break some things. So he's got something to do. Right? And it happens a lot, right? Because if I've got nothing to do and I'm twiddling my thumbs and I'm bored out of my brains, I'll go down to the workshop and I'll start saying, hey, why are you doing things that way? Let me show you, and I'll break things. Now, that only happens if I don't have something else to focus on. So at that top level, and we call this the leverage level, is where the business owner makes the best money, or the big game, right? And this could be things like acquisition, franchising, multiplication, going into other territories, and doing deals, right? So I can grow. The quickest way to grow a business is to acquire.
Yes.
And acquisition can be a really good deal or a really bad deal, right? Because there's no rigid formula to acquisition, right? So the idea is to spend time in that space. And so when a business owner has time on their hands, they need to start becoming self-disciplined to go and look at deals, evaluate deals, do due diligence, and find ways to grow the business through either acquisition or multiplication. Now, if they're not doing that, if they're going, hey, I'm done, everyone else is doing the work and I can sit here twiddling my thumbs, my suggestion is get out of there and go overseas and do something where you're not
some hobbies.
Because if you don't do that, you're going to break it.
Yeah, I resonate with that, mate. I self-sabotaged for many years, breaking stuff that just didn't need to be broken. And when I made that transition, and I realized I actually saw an interview with Warren Buffett, and it was along the lines of a similar conversation. And they're like, Warren, how long do you take to make these decisions? You're dealing with so much money. Yeah. How don't you get like itchy feet to feel like you need to be in the market? Like you've always been very good at making very good, calculated, well-timed decisions. Yeah. And he said, look, in some cases I can take up to a year to make a decision. And it was the shift from in my early career where it was about the quantity of my actions to now it's about the quality of my actions. And if I can make one good decision a year, it could be worth billions of dollars. And I'm like, aha, I get it. And now a lot of our focus is on acquisition. But it's a hard shift to make, right? Because a lot of us have that identity, particularly when we've come from, say, a hardworking background. Our family, our parents were battlers. Yeah. We've battled. And to get out of that battle, it's challenging.
Yeah. So this is the time for money transition to value. Yes. Right? Yeah. When you said that, I thought of a guy I met a few years back, and he was a property developer. And he was making $2 million a year, just one-man band on his own. Wow. I said, $2 million a year, that's not bad. He goes, that's net profit. I said, wow, how many developments a year do you do? He goes, one. I said, only one? He goes, well, let me explain how I do this. I look at over 1,000 properties before I decide on one. Wow. So he goes, every day I sit in the cafe all day and I'm just scrolling through the screen, making phone calls, and it takes me a year to find that one. Because if I jump on too early, I'm not going to make the profit. So I think part of what you just described is this idea of being strategic in your thinking and being okay with sitting around thinking about things as opposed to feeling like I need to do stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. So a bit of a recap. The first stage is transition from self-employment into being a business owner. We need to make sure that we have a business that isn't just directly tied to our money, because we're not going to be making money when we're on holidays and trying to enjoy, and there's always going to be that guilt. Next, when we're a business owner, we need to pay ourselves first. We need to be taking chips off the table. That helps us evaluate our return on investment, and we can be more strategic around how we grow that business to try and improve that net cash flow. And then once we get to that point where we're starting to go from trading time to trading value, it's about that quality over quantity. So what happens next, mate? Is that what we do forever? Is there a stage beyond that?
That's a good question. Look, as you and I both know, there is an end. We just don't know when it is, right? But we can predict it within sort of plus or minus 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, right? And I think when people are young and ambitious, they don't think of the end. And this is one of my big challenges with most people in business is, my question I ask people is, what will your business look like when it's finished? And they look at me like, what do you mean finished? I'm just starting. I've got no intention of retiring. I said, no. But let me ask you this. If I went to a builder and I said, build me a house, and the guy goes, no problem. How many floors do you want? I say, no, don't worry about how many floors. Just start. It's the most ridiculous metaphor, right? But then if I say to a business owner, what are you building? They go, oh, no, I just need a few more clients. Right? So they're doing exactly that. Right. So the first thing is you need to get a picture of the end result. And the end result is going to be probably one of three things. You're either going to go out of business, close the doors, which is 80% of businesses in Australia, just literally, especially services businesses, they just close. The second one is that you sell it. And if you're thinking of selling it, there's two things you need to know: how much and when. Probably three things, and who's going to buy it, right? So you need to know who you're selling it to, so you build it to sell. And the third thing is it runs under management. They're all valid, right? And businesses choose your own adventure. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, but if you don't choose any of them and just say, I just need to get a few more clients, or I'm not thinking about the end, I'm thinking about the start, you can't build anything, right? Because you're not building to a plan. So this whole idea of when it's finished, for some people, it's going to be, I'm just selling it. When I get to retirement age, I'm going to sell it for $3 million, and I know who's going to buy it, and I'm building it to that value, because you can predict how big a business needs to be to get a sale price depending on the service industry, right? So that's probably the most viable.
So critical, mate, because I think particularly for small business owners, and let's face it, a small business is anything under 50 million, right? And small business owners typically run the business with this lifestyle business mentality that they've got so much love in for their business. It's like a baby. They couldn't imagine trying to put a price on one of your children. You can't do it. And that's why so many business owners struggle. But it becomes a double-edged sword, because by not thinking about selling and not having an exit plan, we're not building the business with intention, and therefore we have to run the business as opposed to the business running for us. And we've made this transition ourselves. Kind of probably early on in our kind of when we started the business, we started Aureus about 5 years ago. We said, we're never going to sell, we're never going to float. We're just going to keep running it, keep scaling it, build it as big as we can. And as we've got a little bit more mature and a little bit older, Dave, I've come to realize that we need to be planning towards something, even if that something doesn't necessarily eventuate, because we all need a North Star. So of recent times, we've had a lot of conversations to talk about getting to a listing event over the next 3 to 5 years. And we go, okay, cool. If we're going to build it for that purpose, it needs to be built a very specific way. So it becomes a decision-making lens. And even if we get to a point where we're going to list, and let's say we choose to sell it to private equity, or we keep running it as an unlisted company or whatever, it's going to be better as a result because we've built it with intention and we've built it with focus.
There you go. And even if you never make it, at least you're heading in the right direction, right? And this is the missing link for most people. They go, oh, I'm not sure. I don't know which way. We'll just go with the flow. And you go, okay, well, that's okay. But what I've learned is this. When someone knows where they're going, right, their chance of getting there is much, much greater than someone who has no idea, right? And so in the end, it could be a sale event. It could be a float event. It could be a under management event. Remember, with under management, the rules are that you leave, right? Under management means under management, okay? So it doesn't matter. And this is the hardest part because people have to decide early and they go, we actually don't know. But here's the thing, you have to have some level of destination in mind. And that's probably the biggest mistake, I think, for most people is they're not willing to commit to a destination. Or the other side of this is they do, and it's too small.
Yes.
Okay, they go, look, I just want to make $100,000 a year, passive income. And you go, that's not even the wage that you would make. So let's go for 3 times that. And they go, 300,000. I go, well, that's the minimum, right? Because if you're going to build it, you might as well build it. It doesn't take that much more effort to build a big business than a small business. It's the same. It's 40-hour week or whatever it is that you do. So it's that whole forcing yourself to think about the end and what will it look like when it's finished.
I really like that philosophy, mate. That's great. So, mate, let's take a little bit of a shift in tact. And this is obviously a little bit of our wheelhouse, but I know we've got very similar values with this. I see so many business owners not prioritizing building wealth from this same point, right? They're not prepared to define the destination. They're not prepared to think further enough in the future. And the common excuse that we hear is like, I'll deal with wealth later once I've got my business to a point that it's achieved X, Y, and Z, whatever that goalpost may be. So, mate, you've seen probably thousands of businesses over the last couple of decades. So what's your philosophy around wealth building as a business owner, and what should business owners really be considering when it comes to building wealth as a business owner?
I think it was one of our mutual friends that said your business should be a cash shitting machine. And it stuck with me. I was like, yeah, that's probably right. And really what happens is people get so involved in the business, their ego gets involved, and all they're thinking about is, I'm going to make it in this business and I'll be successful. But here's the truth of the matter. The business is a means to an end.
Yes.
And the end needs to be personal. And to me, at minimum, you want to retire with enough money to continue your lifestyle. Okay. Now, that's different for different people, so there's no right number here. But I think, I can't remember who said this, but I think it was Kiyosaki again, who said, as long as your passive income exceeds your expenses, you now have the freedom of choice.
Yes.
So for me, if I'm building my business, I'm saying I'm building it to generate cash, a cash excreting machine. And that money goes into savings or investment so that I have a portfolio that's outside of the business, and that's going to now take my risk away. Okay. Now, whether it's property or shares, or that's another conversation that you guys would have. But I think the whole end of the business should be to build some level of nest egg that gives you a reliance, so that this is the beauty. When you have a passive income that exceeds your expenses, you work because you want to, not because you have to. And so it's a very different mindset around, well, what will I do to add value, or what will I do to contribute, because I don't need the money anymore. Everything's covered. And I think if people work towards having that outside their business and saying the business needs to build that, then they're on the right path.
I love it. Yeah. And I think it ties into making your business more valuable, because if you can demonstrate to a potential purchaser that you've used your business as the cash cow that's fueled your ability to create financial freedom, that's what an investor wants. They want a vehicle that is an investment that produces them an outcome, right? So I think it all comes together as opposed to them being opposing things. Now, on the flip side, mate, I see business owners make some big faux pas when it comes to wealth creation. So, mate, where do you think are the biggest mistakes that business owners make when it comes to building wealth once maybe they've created some extra time, some extra flexibility, and they now start getting into investing?
Here's my favourite mistake. Put all your money on black.
Oh, gosh.
And then red comes up, right? And it's over. So I think the first mistake is that they don't diversify. They put everything into, there's a couple of sayings around put all your eggs in one basket and wash that basket. So I think the first thing is to make sure that they're thinking about, well, how am I managing risk? Okay, because risk is unquantified. And the reason I said 3 times your wage if you run a business is because business has got inherent risk in it. And you can't quantify risk in dollars easily, right? Unless you pay insurance and then you understand it. What happens is you've got to have a strategy that accommodates if things go wrong. Yep. And so mitigation through different portfolios or through different risk profiles helps. And I think that mistake is a naive investor doesn't know what they don't know.
Yes.
So, you've heard the statistics on lottery, right? On the Tats Lotto, 80% of people who win Tats Lotto within 2 years
They blow it all.
are poorer than they were before they started, but they also bust a whole lot of the relationships that they had along the way. And the reasoning behind that is if I give $1 million to a person who's never had $1 million and say, hey, here's $1 million, you should invest it, they go, yeah, no problem. But they've got no concept of investment. So they go
their
out.
stripes. They've got no idea.
And their brother-in-law knocks on the door and says, hey, have I got an opportunity for you? And it's like, there goes the money. So I think the idea of starting to think like a millionaire before the million shows up is critical. And this is education, and this is learning about strategies and speaking to people like yourselves in terms of investment options, even before I have the money. Because if I wait till I've got the money, I don't have the wisdom to do the right thing. So I need to be starting to learn about that stuff early.
100%. And this is why I think that all business owners, they need to have a team of trusted advisors, basically a board of advisors. My personal opinion, and I have this myself, you should have a wealth coach, somebody who's able to help you navigate your personal financial and investment decisions. You need a mortgage broker because most people are going to build wealth through properties. You need somebody who's going to help you get that finance. You need an accountant, somebody who's going to help you keep out of jail and make sure that you pay the tax man. And you need a business coach because ultimately the ability for you to build wealth is going to be limited by the success of your business and the scalability of that business. And from my perspective, your business is your best investment, but it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of your investment strategy. It's about how do we turn profit into wealth. And I think that's the magic formula for achieving financial success.
Yeah, I'll add one more in there, a well-being coach.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think these days we're starting to move into a world where people recognise the importance of health.
Sure.
Because I can have all the money in the world, but if I'm dying in hospital, it's not going to save me.
Of course.
And I think people underestimate because health is one of those elements that we go, oh, yeah, we can exercise when we've got time. I'm too busy at work to worry about diet. And we just dig great for ourselves. So you're spot on. You need those advisors around you, and you need to be mindful that you can't be good at everything.
No.
And these advisors, their job is to actually, they've got your back, right? They're saying, you know what, you might be awesome as a financial planner, but let's talk about your health. And we're not just talking about physical. I'm talking about, mental health as well. And we don't give these things attention. So having those elements around you, having those people around you to sort of guide you will make sure you get the most out.
I agree, mate. And look, it's something that I've invested a lot of time and effort in. My mindset and wellbeing coach is going to get the shits of me for not dropping his name. But it is one of those things, right? We see that so many business owners trade in that one currency, being money, and they undervalue the quality of their life and their health. You can have all the money in the world. If you're not healthy, you're not going to be able to enjoy it. So I'm glad you brought that up, mate. So let's talk a little bit about your programs and how you help clients. So David, who's an ideal client for you? Who do you typically work with? We said professional services, but where are they in their journey typically?
Yeah, so our sweet spot is generally $1 million to $20 million, right? If you want to narrow it down, you'd say 1 to 5. And the reason that's our sweet spot is that's literally where people say, I can't do this on my own anymore. And even if I have my VA and my PA and my bookkeeper, this is like a life support system for a one-man band, right? So we normally talk about 3+ employees, and we start talking about some of those are consultants, not just a support mechanism, okay? This transition from being self-employed or being employed with a support system to actually running teams of people is quite difficult for most, right? Because they go into their trade because they're really good as consultants, right? They might be really good financial planners, or they might be brilliant at tax, or they might be brilliant at engineering.
Yes.
But being a brilliant engineer doesn't mean you know how to build your team, right? So we start looking at things like job descriptions, roles, responsibilities, organization structure. How do you make sure these people know what they're supposed to be doing, and how do we make sure that they self-manage? Yep. So building teams is about a few things, right? One is being really clear on what you want your people to do, and the second one is attracting high caliber people. So the sweet spot for us is helping people who are wanting to navigate into that space and starting to build this dynamic team environment. Because really we see that unless you're a recruiter, that's not your space. And even recruiters are not necessarily good at building teams.
No, I agree, mate. And it's tough out there. We're nearly at full employment. Getting high quality talent is becoming more and more challenging. I think the statistics I saw recently is that 50% of job ads being posted are going unfilled. So if you're not getting the right support from experts around this stuff like you guys, you're not going to be filling those seats. And if you do fill them, you might not be filling them with the right people. So I think this is of utmost importance, particularly when you're 7 figures and above.
Yeah, and looking at a P&L, the most expensive item is wages.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not even like a little bit more expensive, it's multiples more expensive.
Yes.
And you think, well, I'm looking at how do I regulate my expenses and how do I optimize my return on investment in my business? And I'll suggest that the one area that most people don't spend enough time focusing on is return on wages.
Makes
So
a lot of
making
sense.
sure I'm getting results out of my team.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Mate, we've covered a lot of topics here today. If anybody's listened to what we're talking about and wants to learn more, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and the team?
Yeah, look, there's 2 ways. Google David Guest. Just be careful because one of me was married to Liza Minnelli and got in all sorts of trouble.
That's not you, just to confirm.
Just to confirm, and I don't look like that. The second way is they can go to outcomes.business is the website. Or if you just type in Google Outcomes Australia or Outcomes Business, you'll find it. And just jump on the website. We've got a ton of resources available for those guys who are wanting to grow just to understand exactly what they need to do. So we provide a lot of templates online just to get them started. Or if they want to reach out directly, they can just reach me on LinkedIn. They can reach me on Facebook. They can reach me on the website as well.
Beautiful. We'll include all those links in the show notes, guys. So make sure you jump in there, connect with David and the team, and make sure you push the needle forwards. So, David, if you were going to leave the listeners with one last golden nugget, what would that last golden nugget be?
You got me now. I think it's the distinction between in and on. You know, we talk about self-employment and the people take pride in saying, you know, I'm a small business owner, I'm self-employed. And I think that's one of the sort of inbred lies that we get taught. Right, that self-employment is a business. It's probably thinking that self-employment is a job with risk, okay? If you're genuinely wanting to build a business, you need to get that distinction, okay? The distinction is I'm building an asset that will run without me versus I'm building a job that requires me to be there all the time. So once we get that in our head, it doesn't matter which one you choose, right? As long as you know what you're building and you're not sort of living in this denial, this phase of denial where you're sort of saying I'm running a business, but you're just not.
I think that's great advice, mate. I think there's a lot of people who just need to make that distinction so then they can work out what they want to progress to. And your business can only be better as a result of making that distinction and working how you bridge that gap. So, mate, this has been super valuable. Guys, if you've enjoyed this podcast, make sure you get in touch with David and the team. And remember, a good idea in theory remains exactly that, just a good idea until you put it into place. So make sure that you implement. David, thanks for making the time, mate. I really appreciate it and look forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. That was awesome. Cheers.